This is 2021 hours GMT on Friday, the 31st of July 2020. We're coming to the end of the day, being observed as the first day of Eid al Adha in London, in the UK. And in this part, we shall be going over some of the poems and poetry referred to in the previous editions and attributing to the poet, rebel poet Qazi Nazrul. The idea behind that is to create an atmosphere, intellectual atmosphere of awareness of something that is original, something that is universal, something that is applicable to all of humanity in the current critical atmosphere being experienced by humanity across the world. And one of the most commonest themes of shared experience, not with the same feeling of the sharing, but the shared experience is, in the context of the West, the presence of migrants from Africa and Asia. And I go back a few editions and talk about the poet Rabindranath Tagore, who was the author of an essay about library. And he said in that piece about the people he was addressing in the language that he wrote his essay in, the primary audience or readership, the Bangla language speaking people, and he called them Bengalis or Bengalis. And he asked the question, when the world outside of Bengal or Bangla speaking world, the international world across the planet, had people bringing original contributions to make human life better, what message are we giving out to the world, presenting to the world? Now, that is the message that remains actively on the table. That is the question. What is the positive contribution, original contribution to the plight, to the cause and the need of changing humanity that this particular community can bring? And I'm extrapolating from that and applying the same principle. And in the context of the Eid, I'm saying, what are the Muslims bringing to the world for the betterment of humanity? And this is the message that is repeatedly, time and again, stated, reiterated in the poetry of Qazi Nazrul. And Nazrul is the one that presented issues about humanity and the plight of humanity most forcefully and eloquently, even more forcefully, far more forcefully, far more frequently than the contribution made by Rabindranath Tagore. Tagore was, of course, at least 3 decades or so older or more, older than Nazrul. So Tagore preceded Nazrul as a writer, as a poet, as an essayist, and as a philosopher. But the incidents of rebel poet Qazi Nazrul making worldwide appeals and pleas and arguments for liberation, for freedom, for equality, Nazrul exceeded the rate, the frequency, the emphasis of Rabindranath Tagore, whose specialism lay in other aspects of philosophy and thought. So therefore, they are not to be compared as like with like, but they are two different dimensions, if you like. And the dimension of Nazrul Islam is the most relevant dimension that must be embraced in full by the people observing Eid al Adha in the UK and in the rest of the world today, this week. And I am saying that the time has come for that dimension, that message, that advocacy to be embraced and practiced throughout the year, not just for the week of Eid al Adha or Eid al Fitr, but throughout the year, throughout the world, irrespective of the origins of the people being affected by poverty and hunger and famine and dislocation and disenfranchisement and denial. So this is the message I'm giving on this occasion by citing Qazi Nazrul Islam, and I'm going to say that that is a unique, positive resource for the whole of humanity. It is worth more, billions of times more, than all the combined wealth of Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, or any of the other descriptions of billionaires. Because these billionaires are not devoting their billions to the emancipation of humanity. They are robbing the humanity and they are making the world's population poorer. And this is the difference. These billionaires are big looters in systematic, organized exploitation made available to them under the guise of enterprise. That enterprise has not been subjected to rigor, audit, analysis, rejection, let alone replacement by the just humanitarian real practice that is conveyed in the message that was written, thought about by Qazi Nazrul Islam, and I am updating the insertion of that message by taking into account the realities of today's world. The pandemic has exposed the inadequacy of big governments in the West, big governments, including all the governments of all the countries that have held sway and have occupied the most of the rest of the world in Asia and Africa as imperialist powers. Now, the fact that millions of people in the West, across the West, are being exposed to this pandemic and the lack of response or lack of willingness to protect the people by these governments shows the dishonesty, the immorality, and the unacceptability on a universal basis of these people who are the fronters of the government, claimants to positions in the government and the power. So the message that Qazi Nazrul Islam articulated by using his knowledge and his understanding of the faith of Islam is far more humane, far more liberating, far more equalizing, far more just and fair than anything that any of the regimes in the West can offer or has been able to offer. So This is the message that Muslims must embrace. And that means that Muslims must read. The revelation of the Holy Quran is widely accepted as having begun with read. Read in the name of your Lord who created. Iqra bi ismi rabbika allazi khalaq. Iqra bi ismi rabbika allazi khalaq. Read in the name of your Lord who created. And read in the name of your Lord who created embraces, includes, encompasses all that is true and truthful. And what poets, thinkers, philosophers, such as Qazi Nazrul wrote includes the truth. So the rest of the Quran, the original revelation as is revered by the Muslim community, must be read, understood, and given updated acceptability by accepting the contributions of the likes of Qazi Nazrul. So we are saying that the whole year should be a year of observing the principles, the message of Eid al Adha and Eid al Fitr. Eid al Fitr comes at the end of the month of Ramadan, and it is marked by the Muslims observing the duty, one of the pillars of faith of Islam, the duty is to give alms and charity. And that is what must be practiced throughout the year. And that including the other duties that those who have among the Muslims must share all their belongings, their possessions, and their resources with the Muslims who don't have. And irrespective of the origins, in terms of the caste system that is being continued in effect across most of the subcontinent, the caste and the color and the gender or any other backgrounds of the person being helped. And the help should be aimed to address the immediate need and then to enable the persons to get out of the need and out of any requirement to depend on other people and be free to have a self-fulfilling occupation or vocation or means to support their material needs throughout the year without losing dignity, losing their freedom and the universality of their humanity. This is the message that has not been placed before the world of the Muslims by any effort done by any organization or initiative that I have seen. There are, of course, charitable organizations modeled after the main models after the Western origins, if you like. The Red Cross has been copied by Red Crescent and similar other smaller outfits that have been copied. What I'm saying is that the Muslims take the lead and be seen to be the leaders. And while doing that, Muslims must keep the accountability of the people operating such activities and charitable actions and educational actions, that these people are free from corruption, from exploiting their position in relation to the people they are supposedly helping and liberating from poverty and hunger and protecting them. Protection does not include any amount of exploitation. And that is the kind of message that we shall be continuing throughout this week. And we shall be doing so by referring to some of the poems that Qazi Nazrul wrote, and we shall be referring to other literature and examples. Now, in the actual issue of the latest issue of Private Eye, the community secretary, that is the housing minister, Robert Jenrick, is featured again, but he is featured as a kind of caricature. But the point I'm making here at this point is that Private Eye is called the satirical magazine, the magazine that contains satire. This is the current issue, which is the issue that is dated today, but it is available. Ordinarily, it's available 3 days earlier. And because of the pandemic, most of the news agents and news outlets where I would pick up the issue when it comes out on the Tuesday at about 11 o'clock, those have been shut. So I have not been able to pick up this early edition or the early copies of the normal official edition. This is the issue number 1527, and it starts from today, or dated from today, 31st of July to 13th of August 2020. And the fact that its cover is devoted to the royal family, Diana's children and their wives, shows that Private Eye has concluded that the pandemic is over, or concluded that the pandemonium of the Boris Johnson fronted government has ended. But today's news, which the Private Eye cannot be expected to be aware of because it's a fortnightly confection, the today's news, that is news on Friday, the 31st of July 2020, is that far from ending, the pandemic in the UK is still persisting and spreading, to the extent that Boris Johnson, who can be expected to be changing his mind and making contradictory statements, has again delayed his otherwise trumpeted ending of the lockdown, or reducing the lockdown, or the reducing the length of the quarantine, because the pandemic is persisting. So that's the Private Eye failing to show that the pandemic is as rigorous in its attack on the vulnerable pandemonium government's regime as it actually is. So the Private Eye is going back to being ridiculous, not satirical. It's ridiculous, irrelevant. And the internal inside page 8 of the current edition of Private Eye says, pandemic update, MD on the new abnormal. Now this is also, it's typical of not being really seriously critical of the government, pandemonium government fronted by Boris Johnson. None of the contents in this issue addresses the inadequacy of the British Parliament, the democratic Parliament, the mother of Parliament, because it touches on them and it tickles them. আমরা দেখো যে হেড কোথায়, ওবাইক টুকরা মারে, ওবাইকটা না মারে, আসলে কিন্তু কোনো রিয়েল কোনো ক্ষতিকর কোনো জিনিস করে না, ক্ষতি দ্বারা করে তারে ক্ষমতার থেকে হরায়, পাওয়ার থেকে হরায়, বা তারে মানুষের কাছে আনএক্সেপ্টেবল করে, ইলা কোনো জিনিস না। এই হইল গিয়া রবার্ট জেনরিক্স kind of coverage as a satire piece at page 34, and I'll read this one. Housing rules adjusted to allow multiple stories. It's a cheap shot at generic. It's a cheap shot, unoriginal, based on the headlines, and it avoids all the realities of the failures of the local councils and of the big charities, and of course the government. It says that the rules adjusted to allow multiple stories. It's a take on the fact that Jenrick has hit the headline and he has been celebrated by the right wing, Murdoch Press and the Daily Mail, and the likes of the far right racist anti Muslims, such as Jeremy Clarkson, who celebrated and feted Jenrick lifting the remaining regulations on planning on house building. And Clarkson said in The Sun that by doing that, Jenrick was solving the housing problem. That was a multifaceted lie and typically ignorant stupidity. And what we are saying here is that there is no substance in any of the promotions that Jenrick has been receiving from the right-wing conservative supporting Fleet Street mainstream media in this country. And so therefore this headline in the satire section, so-called attempted satire section in Private Eye, is the housing rules adjusted to allow multiple stories is about the lifting of the regulations. So it says the Conservative Party has announced a sweeping set of adjustments to housing rules so that ministers can make multiple additions to their stories. So this is like Jenrick being caught lying, caught abusing, caught receiving bribes from the billionaire porn entrepreneur, Dirty Richard Desmond, over the West Ferry Printworks, based in the Isle of Dogs in Tower Hamlets. And it says, Housing Secretary Robert Jenrick explained within false quotes, for too long, ministers in this country, ordinary, hardworking ministers, who want to do nothing more than take big wages of cash from the dodgy porn barons turned property developers, have been unable to adjust their story at will. That ends now. Next paragraph with next false quotes. From now on, ministers will be allowed to make unlimited adjustments to that story. So they can explain that they've never heard of Richard Desmond, then that they have heard of him but never met him, then that they met him but only briefly, then that they are close friends who go skiing together, then that they had a 6-month affair in the early 2000s on Philip Green's yacht, but that none of this means there was any impropriety at all. So this is a cheap kind of take on the various stories based on Jenrick's utterances in response to the reports showing that he was abusing his position and he abused his position and he received thousands of pounds in donations to the Tories, and in return for which donations from the porn billionaire, he overtook the local authority and issued a planning permission for the West Ferry Road Printworks degeneration housing project for the rich that was applied for by the porn billionaire. This is not examining the deficiencies in the planning process. It is not examining the role of Tower Hamlets Council in giving planning permission to several billionaires over the years and to degenerating the whole of the areas from Aldgate East going all the way to Limehouse and the other way as well, expanding and high-rise buildings. So there is no accounting for the unaccountability of Tower Hamlets Council's own planning disaster. So that's the Private Eye failing to run a rigorously factual, socially responsible informative item about this disastrous occupant of the post of community secretary or the housing minister. And what I'm saying is that any observer of the mainstream, any intelligent, informed, rigorous student of the mainstream media in the West cannot fail to spot this. But they have to come forward. I have yet to see any informed observer come out on the mainstream and talk about these things. They have slots, but they haven't got actual spots of observation, and the narrative has to be brought up to date. This is where Qazi Nazrul Islam and his inspiring style becomes relevant. It's a poem he wrote, Chol Chol Chol, Uddo Gogone Baje Madol, নিম্নে উতলা ধরণী তল অরুণ প্রাতের তরুণ দল চল রে চল উষার দুয়ারে হানিয়াঘাত আমরা আনিব রাঙা প্রভাত আমরা টুটাবো তিমির রাত বাদার বিন্দাচল নবনবীনের গাহিয়া গান সজীব করিব মহাশ্মশান আমরা দানিব নতুন প্রাণ বাহুতে নবীন বল চল রে নওজোয়ান শোন রে পাতিয়া কান মৃত্যু তরণ দুয়ারে দুয়ারে জীবনের আহ্বান. Now this is written in elegant Bangla, and for a Muslim to write elegant Bangla was resented by Nazrul's contemporaries because his Bangla was of a higher quality than anything that had been seen until he began. And so therefore, this is not something that will be immediately, word for word, understandable to most people, even in Bangladesh, unless they have studied this. Because some of the words are Sanskrit based, and this is called Tod Bobo in the grammar, in the language, in the science of language or linguistics. And some are Tod Shamo, and some are completely new. So chol 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 urdho gogone baje madol nimne utola toroni dol orun prater torun dol chol re chol. I printed this poem in the first edition of the Bangladeshis Educational Needs in Tower Hamlets bulletin that I conceived, devised, wrote, edited, and published in May 1983 from New Road, London E1 1HE, UK. Now, the reason I published the first stanzas of this poem included the fact that I grew up reading this. When I first came across this poem, as I learned to read from my mother. And I did that even before I went to school, formal school. So this is something that is very close to my heart, and it is not only because it's rhythmic, it's melodious, it's beautifully written, but it is absolutely enchanting in terms of the attraction that it raises in the idea of the person who is fresh, starting life afresh, and others starting life afresh. So chol 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 is march on. I translated this in the next edition of Benth Bulletin, which was June 1983. I translated it spontaneously. It might have coincided with other persons using the same kind of phrase, but I was not doing that consciously by imitating anyone. I was doing it spontaneously. And I translated this as chol chol chol, march on, march on, march on. And then I went on. So Uddo Gogone Baje Madol, Uddo Gogone Baje Madol. This is a kind of imagery that is absolutely beautiful. It is out of this world, it's above this world, above this planet. Uddo gogone baje madol. You cannot have madol or any chorus or any sound in the skies, in the atmosphere. But that is what he realized, he made possible. Nimne utola dhoronitol. And he was saying, quite clearly, he was talking about the above and the below on the surface. Uddo gogone baje madol, nimne utola dhoronitol. Orun prater torun dol cholre chol. He was absolutely embodying the young persons, the gang or the band of youths of the dawn, to start the march at dawn. Now, this is one of the most often played military band music that is based on this one. Chol. It's a military music that has been played in India and it's been played in Bangladesh, of course, but it had been played before Bangladesh became a separate from then Pakistan. It is that attractive, universal, it doesn't make any difference what the political composition is of the particular regime that is scripting this tune based on this. Ushar Duare Hani Agad. This is absolutely fascinating. So, what I'm saying is that on this Eid occasion, the attempt by the Bangladeshis Educational Needs in Tower Hamlets in 1983 that I chaired and I was on course to implementing included a program of education that had prominent place for the writings of Qazi Nazrul Islam, the writings of Rabindranath Tagore, the writings of other deeply thoughtful thinking contributors whose work and the contribution, the level of humanity, liberation, exceeded, rose above anything that contemporary writers from any part of the West have offered. That is what I have said many times, and I want to say this again because this is the first day of Eid al Adha ending in London, UK, and this is the liberation message, which is that if we enrich the mind of the child with the food and the nutrient of humanity, solidarity, equality, respect, then you can have the body enriched. And this is something lacking. Everything that Tony Blair has been credited internally, domestically for, in terms of what he brought into government, has been mentioned by including Tony Blair's apparent revolution in education and school performance, league tables. And Tower Hamlets league tables have been featured in regular yearly results occasions as being one of the best in the country. I shall come to that in other editions because it is a long issue that needs to be updated by going through all the items. But essentially, I have to say that I created the environment in the Benth Bulletin where I said the Tower Hamlets was failing. And I said that in 1985, or at least I began to say it in print in extensive detail, in 1985, when I was diagnosing and dissecting the then Swan report on the future of education. I shall come to that, and it will be quite clear that I created the revolution in Tower Hamlets, education and schools performance. And 2 years later, I defended and I protected, I stopped the destruction as a single-sex school, or what is now the Mulberry School for Girls, which is the pride of Tower Hamlets schools because it does so well in terms of the formal exams. I did that by collecting thousands of signatures across Tower Hamlets, and as I said in a previous edition of this, I was asked, why do you want these signatures? What are you going to do with this? Implying that I was probably enriching myself with those signatures. I wasn't. I was enriching these parents, this community. And from 87 to 97 is 10 years, 2007 is 20, 17, 30. This is 33 years since I did that. And for 33 years, Tower Hamlets Girls' School as it then was, and Mulberry School as it has been, has produced among the best results in competitive exams in this country. And the beneficiaries have been the people that I don't even know, most of them, and their children. And it is because of me doing the collecting the signature and doing the petition. This is the battle that I fought against at least two known, now both former councillors of Tower Hamlets Council. They were not councillors in 1987, but these are two former councillors. Both of them were Labour councillors at the time. Both ceased to be Labour councillors, but they were bribed by the Inner London Education Authority, which was the authority that was trying to change the Mulberry School or the Tower Hamlets School for Girls into a mixed sex school. Now, suffice to say that mixed sex school is something that should be discouraged, not because most of the schools concerned currently, under current demographic arrangements, are populated by Muslims, but because it has been found in the Western system that girls and boys do much better in terms of learning if they are schooled separately, not mixed together in the puberty ages or post-puberty ages. And this campaign that I ran in 1987 to keep the Mulberry School or the Tower Hamlets School for Girls from being turned into a mixed school by Tower Hamlets Council and the Inner London Education Authority, which was the main local authority overseeing and controlling the 10 Inner London boroughs, including Tower Hamlets. This was a campaign that I did, and the Tower Hamlets ex-councillors, the two ex-councillors, were known to me by other people they were talking to in the community as having been tasked to smear me and spread lies about my motives for this petition. It is quite well known, but it has not documentary produced evidence has not been produced to show this, but substantially the significant contextual relationship between these two spreading rumors against me and the purpose of the Inner London Education Authority, which my petition targeted, is in no doubt they were connected. I have been told that they were paid thousands of pounds to spread rumors about me of all descriptions. I did not stop, and this is evident in the fact that the then Secretary of State, which is central government for education, accepted my petition and rejected the proposal by the Inner London Education Authority. Now, the same thing happened about 87, 97, 2000, about just 20 years later over the Crossrail whole plot and my campaign under the banner of Khoodeelaar. defending the community in the east end of London. So all the councillors in place on Tower Hamlets Council at the time, all the councillors carrying the Labour Party card, all those councillors went around and spread rumors, similar rumors that the other two had spread against me 20 years earlier about the petition that I was collecting to protect the status of the Tower Hamlets School for Girls as a single-sex girls' school. It is an educationally, if you like, tested and demonstrated and successfully evident matter that single-sex schools for adult girls or post-pubertal students, boys and girls, single sex is the best way to accommodate their schooling. And this is also proven by what happened at the Dainford School, as it then was in 1980s, early 1980s. And the Dainford School was turned into a mixed-sex school in the 1980s by Tower Hamlets Council. I was requested by one group of parents in the 1984, 85, 83, 84, 85 to help them stop this school being turned into a mixed sex boys and girls secondary school. I did my best and we collected about 1800 signatures, but we couldn't collect a few hundred more because some of the Bangladeshi teachers and agents employed by Tower Hamlets Council spread rumors again against me and said that I had a purpose, I had an ulterior motive. But what happened with Shamima Begum and her two fellow schoolmates or two other schoolgirls that went to Syria in February 2015 more than amply vindicated what I had said 20 years earlier when I took part and led the campaign to stop the Dainford School being turned into a mixed-sex school. One of the effects, negative effects that I warned would happen if the school became mixed sex would be the removal of whatever restraint there were, self-discipline there were. And not only have they been removed completely, but they have been exposed to the whole world to the point where this school, whatever the name, they have changed the school name many times in that time. That school became a center of jihadis, children being radicalized. And the Tower Hamlets Council, which was the corrupt council even in 1984-85, behind the introduction of the agenda of ending the single-sex boys' status or character of the school, was found to have neglected its duty of safeguarding children. And it is still caught in the nightmare situation where children are not being safeguarded in the way that they should be. We shall come to the details of the current safeguarding issues and failures. So what I'm saying is that I have been doing this despite the concerted efforts of the local council, of the Inner London Education Authority, and their agents and touts and employees and their bribed personnel. Many of them, in fact, most of them, happening to be Bangladeshis and happening to be getting in positions with the votes or the approval of the Bangladeshis. But they are sinking the future of the Bangladeshi children, Bangladeshi community, and they're doing that by denying the duty of telling the truth and bringing out the message of equality, liberation, justice and fairness and tolerance, and keeping the community's image firmly fixed in the worst possible box of public opinion in the world. It is, it has become, Tower Hamlets has become synonymous. Tower Hamlets has become synonymous with the Muslim population, which is radical. Now, that is not true, but that is the image. Because of the institutional agencies and operations of these people and the failures of the elected councillors, the corrupt role of the elected councillors, and the corrupt role of the elected council, and the failures of the elected MPs and the local representative of the GLA and whatever, and most emphatically the failures of the others, parasites that feed off the community by posing as lawyers, as journalists, reporters, and presenters. And those are the failures and the wrongdoers that are letting down the community and sinking the message of Eid al Adha, Eid al Fitr throughout the whole year, and yet scrambling to take selfies and promote pictures of themselves whenever there is an occasion. So we have to address all these wrongs and wrongdoings and the wrong things, and we have to continue throughout the year the purpose of education, telling the truth, examining the evidence, and supporting all people regardless of their backgrounds and supporting them to be liberated from whatever hardship they're facing, hunger, starvation, discrimination. And as I said, this is the Sunday Times article. This is the Sunday Times article page. It is the article that was published on an inside page, which is the page 12 of the Sunday Times, edition 17th of May this year. Children smuggled in dinghies for slavery. Now there are other pictures of graves, graveyards, and other evidence of people dying while crossing the what is now called English Channel and other parts of the ocean, trying to reach England, Britain, France, Italy, Germany, whatever parts they were actually aiming to reach as part of the battle to escape poverty and hunger and famine and starvation at home. So, this is the reality that children are being smuggled in dinghies to be employed as slaves. This is the reality. And all these children, called unaccompanied children, any number of them today, the Eid occasion, have not been observing the Eid in a cheerful, satisfactory, fulfilling, dignified, peaceful, secure place or manner. And the message is that no Muslim knowingly should be ignoring the plight of other Muslims who are being deprived of food, shelter, and safety and security. And many of these children are open to exploitation, sexual abuse, rape, and prostitution, and some of murders. So the message on the Eid al Adha is that we have not been, as a community, as Ummah, active enough. We have not been even active on the agenda throughout the year. And that has to be the agenda throughout the year. And it has to be translated, reflected, evident in everything we do. So this edition is coming to an end at 21:10 hours GMT, which is 22:10 hours UK time on Friday, the 31st of July 2020, the first day of Eid al Adha as it is being observed in the UK. Khuda Hafiz, Assalamu alaikum, good evening. Wherever you are, stay safe and stay a safe distance from your fellow passengers on the main public vehicles that you travel on. And until the next edition,